Today I want to react to Yasir Nadeem's latest weekly live Q&A. Unlike some previous streams that focused on internal Islamic controversies, this one spent most of its time discussing philosophy. The opening conversations revolved around free will, God's foreknowledge, whether God exists outside time and space, the Kalam cosmological argument, the first cause, infinite regress, and whether a transcendent creator must also possess perfect justice, mercy, wisdom, and knowledge. Later, the discussion briefly moved to Quran-only interpretations of Islam and to the questions of debating critics such as Ghalib Kamal. To summarize Yasir's position as fairly as I can, his method is to build the case step by step. First, establish that the universe requires a creator, then argue that this creator must be timeless and spaceless because he created time and space. From there, argue that such a being must be transcendent and therefore a supreme being. Finally, argue that a supreme being necessarily possesses the highest possible moral qualities: perfect justice, mercy, wisdom, and knowledge. Only after laying that philosophical foundation does the discussion begin to approach Islam. I understand why this approach is attractive. If someone rejects God altogether, there's little point arguing about prophets. But as I listened, I kept thinking that we were spending enormous amounts of time discussing a generic creator while barely touching the question that actually distinguishes Islam from every other religion. For the sake of discussion, let me grant every philosophical step. Let me grant that there is a creator. Let me even grant that this creator is timeless, spaceless, and transcendent. My response is simple. Now what? Why Muhammad? Nothing in those premises logically tells me that a merchant from 7th century Arabia was the final messenger of that creator. That is a separate historical claim requiring separate evidence. This is where I think many discussions quietly make a leap. We begin with an abstract first cause and somehow arrive at Muhammad, the Quran, Hadith, Islamic law, and every other doctrine of Islam. But those steps are not automatic. Even if I accepted a creator tomorrow morning, I would still need reasons to believe Muhammad accurately represented that creator, rather than sincerely believing he had revelations, misunderstanding his experiences, or simply reflecting the moral world in which he lived. To me, Muhammad is the real foundation of Islam. If Muhammad is removed, Islam does not merely lose one teacher among many. The Quran loses its authority because it reaches us through Muhammad. The Sunnah disappears because it depends on Muhammad. Islamic law rests on Muhammad. Even the Quran repeatedly commands believers to obey, quote, Allah and the Messenger. That pairing has always struck me as remarkable. If Muhammad is simply conveying God's words, why does obedience to the Messenger become such a central religious obligation? Islam rises or falls on whether Muhammad truly spoke for God. This is why I wish more live streams spent time defending Muhammad himself. Not merely defending the possibility of a creator, but asking difficult historical questions. Why should Muhammad be regarded as the greatest moral example in history? Why should his life increase my confidence that he spoke for a perfectly good God? Those are the uniquely Islamic questions. And when those questions are raised, I often notice a different style of response. Instead of saying, quote, imitate Muhammad exactly, the conversation frequently shifts towards historical context. Certain actions belong to 7th century Arabia. Certain rulings were for exceptional circumstances. Certain practices should not simply be transplanted into the modern world. I understand why context matters. Every historian cares about context. But it also raises another question. If Muhammad is presented as the timeless example for humanity, how much of his example is timeless and how much belongs to his historical setting? That tension deserves serious discussion. I'm not saying philosophical arguments are worthless. I enjoy philosophy, and questions about free will, causation, and the origin of the universe are fascinating. My criticism is different. I think they can sometimes become a substitute for defending the distinctive claims of Islam. A creator might lead someone toward generic theism or deism. It does not automatically lead to Muhammad. So my biggest takeaway from this live stream is this: arguments for God and arguments for Muhammad are not the same argument. Even if every philosophical argument succeeded, the central question would remain: why should I believe that Muhammad, and not any other religious figure, was the unique spokesperson for the creator of the universe? Until that question is answered, I don't think the case for Islam is complete, and that is the question I hope more Muslims scholars spend their time addressing.